One small flame kept families warm, lit their rooms, and stretched through the night when the lights went out. And it wasn't magic, it was wartime ingenuity. During World War II, power outages weren't rare accidents. They were planned. Blackouts swept across Europe and parts of the world night after night to hide cities from enemy bombers. Electricity was rationed. Fuel was scarce. Coal was prioritized for factories and the military. For ordinary families, staying warm and seeing after sunset became a daily problem that needed a quiet, reliable solution. That's where the World War II candle trick comes in. Simple, practical, and far smarter than it looks. This wasn't a gimmick or folklore. It was a method rooted in basic physics, passed between households, shelters and workshops. A way to turn a single candle into hours of steady warmth and usable light. And once you understand how it worked, you'll see why it became a trusted standby when modern systems failed. Why warmth mattered more than comfort. Cold during wartime wasn't just unpleasant, it was dangerous. Poor heating led to illness, damp homes, frozen pipes, and reduced productivity. In cities under blackout rules, fires were risky. Coal stoves couldn't always be used, and fuel deliveries were unreliable. Electricity, when available, was rationed heavily. People needed heat that was low profile, low risk, and efficient. A single candle fits all three. But on its own, a candle barely warms a room. Left exposed, most of its heat rises straight up and disappears. The trick was finding a way to capture that heat and release it slowly where it actually mattered. That's where the setup changed everything. The candle and clay pot method. The most common version of the WWII candle trick used materials already found in most homes. A candle, a few clay flower pots, and a simple metal stand or bricks to elevate the setup. The principle was straightforward. A candle produces heat. Clay absorbs heat. When stacked correctly, the pots trapped and redistributed that warmth instead of letting it vanish into the air. The candle sat beneath an inverted clay pot, often with one or two larger pots stacked above it, using small spaces like bolts or metal rods. These gaps allowed airflow, feeding the flame while letting heat circulate inside the clay. Over time, the pots heated up and began radiating warmth outward in all directions. It didn't turn a house into a furnace, but it raised the temperature of a small room noticeably. Just enough to take the edge off the cold, enough to protect hands, feet and lungs during those long winter nights. And here's the clever part. Once heated, clay releases warmth slowly. Even after the candle burned down, the pots stayed warm for quite a long time. That meant less fuel used and more consistent heat. Light that worked with blackout rules. Wartime blackout regulations required homes to block visible light from escaping through windows. A bright lamp could make a building a target. Candles were preferred because their light was softer and, easier to control. The clay pot setup diffused the candlelight naturally. Instead of a harsh flame, the glow softened as it reflected off the inner surfaces of the pots. Rooms stayed dim but usable. There was enough light to cook, read or check on children without risking exposure outside. This dual-purpose design really mattered. Every resource had to do more than one job. Heat alone wasn't enough. Light alone wasn't enough. The candle trick delivered both, quietly and reliably. Why it was safer than open flames. Fire safety was a serious concern during the war. Bomb damage, old wiring and crowded housing made fires devastating. An open flame left unattended could be deadly. The clay pot acted as a protective barrier. It reduced drafts that caused flickering. It shielded the flame from accidental contact. And because the candle burned steadily, it was less likely to tip or flare. People still had to be careful. The pots became hot and ventilation mattered. But, compared to improvised heaters or risky fuel burners, this method was relatively controlled. That's why it spread so easily through word of mouth. Not a miracle heater, but a smart one. Here's the important truth. This trick didn't create heat out of nothing. It didn't defy physics. A candle only produces a limited amount of energy. What the setup did was prevent waste. Normally, candle heat rises straight to the ceiling. With clay pots, that heat was captured, stored, and redirected into the room. It was efficiency through design, not exaggeration. In small spaces like bedrooms, basements, or air raid shelters, the effect was noticeable. People reported warmer air near the setup, reduced dampness, and better comfort through the night. In larger rooms, it wasn't enough on its own, but it still contributed. That realistic expectation is what made the trick trustworthy. No false promises, just practical improvement. So, just how widespread was this method? Well, this technique showed up in various forms all across Europe, especially in Britain during the Blitz, and in, parts of occupied Europe where fuel shortages were really severe. It wasn't something officially issued by governments, but you could find it in civil defence pamphlets, household guides, and community advice columns. There were actually quite a few variations. Some folks used metal containers instead of clay, while others would place reflective surfaces behind the setup to kind of push heat back into the room. But honestly, the core idea always stayed the same. Capture heat, slow its escape, and, use what you have. That sort of adaptability, is exactly why it fits so perfectly into the legacy of the survival mindset. Lessons modern survivalists can still use, Today we have central heating, LED lights and backup generators, until we don't. Power outages, fuel shortages and emergencies still happen. The World War II candle trick reminds us that resilience doesn't require advanced technology. Understanding heat transfer really matters. Materials matter. Setup matters. A single flame, used intelligently, can provide more than you might expect. It also teaches restraint. Folks didn't panic or overbuild. They worked within limits. They respected fire. They optimized instead of escalating. That mindset is just as valuable now as it was back in 1941. Why did this trick fade from memory, you might wonder? Well, after the war, electricity became reliable again, you see. Central heating spread far and wide. Convenience, my friends, replaced necessity. Those skills that once kept people alive, well, they quietly disappeared into the shadows of time. You know, the candle trick didn't vanish because it failed. No, it vanished because it wasn't needed anymore. At least, not until the next time systems falter. And who knows when that might be, right? That's the pattern with forgotten survival knowledge. It waits patiently in history, ready to be rediscovered when conditions demand it. The quiet brilliance of wartime homes. There's something powerful about this story. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's grounded. No heroics, no headlines, just families adapting night after night. A candle, a clay pot, a bit of shared knowledge. Enough to make it through until morning. That's survival in its purest form. Practical, calm, effective. If this kind of forgotten ingenuity fascinates you, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Legacy of Survival for more real-world skills pulled straight from history. Like the video if you value practical knowledge that actually works. Share it with someone who believes modern life is invincible. And stay curious, because the past still has a lot to teach us, especially when the lights go out.